The film begins in the Scottish kingdom of Dunbroch, where a young Princess Merida is playing with her parents, Queen Eleanor and King Fergus, in their camp. Despite her love for archery, her father surprised her with a small bow as a gift and began teaching her how to shoot. While practicing, one of her arrows sailed off into the nearby forest. After being told by her mother to retrieve the arrow, she ventured into the forest where she encountered a group of diminutive blue fairies, known as wisps, are said to lead one to their fate. She began to follow them, and they led her back to her parents. But they did not believe her story. Unexpectedly, a terrifyingly enormous black bear named Mordu enters the campground and attacks. Upon seeing this, Queen Eleanor swiftly takes Merida back to their home in Dunbroch. Meanwhile, King Fergus and his men engage in a battle with the beast. Over time, Lord Fergus gained fame for losing his leg to a demon bear, while Merida grew up, gaining 3 mischievous triplet younger brothers and developing her skills in archery and horseback riding. Merida had a tomboyish personality, which was unlike that of a typical princess, and she valued her independence. Despite this, she found it challenging to meet her mother's expectations of becoming a perfect princess like herself. Merida's mother tried to teach her the necessary qualities of a queen, but Merida had difficulty keeping up with the demanding training regimen. One night, a messenger arrives with letters confirming that the 3 nearby clans have agreed to Merida's marriage proposal. Then Eleanor explains this to Merida. However, Merida rejects the proposal because she didn't feel ready, and she storms out of the room. Eleanor follows Merida to her room and has a conversation with her daughter about the importance of maintaining peace and unity among the clans for the sake of their kingdom. She explains that this is the reason why Merida must marry. She recounts the tale of an ancient kingdom where the clans trace their lineage back to 4 brothers. The eldest child of the wise king desired more power than his siblings, and thus, he attempted to rule alone, which resulted in chaos within the kingdom. However, despite this cautionary tale, Merida still harbors resentment towards the arranged marriage. The 3 clans have arrived to present their firstborn sons as potential suitors. Eleanor insists that Merida wear a dress and sit on the throne beside her father to meet the other clans. Amidst great anticipation, the clans make their grand entrance into the palace, proudly introducing themselves and their esteemed eldest son to the awaiting monarchs for Merida's betrothal. Eleanor explains that according to tradition, the firstborn of every clan is required to demonstrate their abilities in a competition chosen by a fair maiden. Merida, upon hearing this, assumes that the rule only applies to firstborns and perceives it as a loophole. As a result, she chooses archery as her competition of choice. Thus, the archery competition commences. The first clan's son takes his shot and hits the end of the board. The oldest son of the second clan hits the board near the center, while the son of the final clan accidentally hits the bullseye. Merida steps forward with her bow and announces that she, as the firstborn of her clan, will compete for herself. Despite her mother Eleanor's order to stop, Merida surprised everyone by hitting all the bullseyes with incredible accuracy. Her arrow landed between the previous shot and the center, causing a shock among the clans gathered around. Eleanor gets angry upon witnessing Merida's actions and takes her to her room where she expresses her frustration. She scolds Merida for embarrassing her in front of everyone and views her actions as disobedient and a failure to uphold tradition. Merida becomes angry and tells her mother that she will not marry, which leads to a disagreement between them. In a fit of rage, Merida slashes the family tapestry. Eleanor becomes even more angry with her daughter's behavior. She furiously throws her sword down and takes Merida's bow, throwing it into the fire while glaring at her. This action breaks Merida, feeling despair, flees into the forest on her horse. However, her ride is abruptly cut short when her horse unexpectedly stops, causing her to fall off its back. As she gets up, she notices a circle made out of stones and then sees once again a wisps in the distance. She decides to follow them and eventually arrives at a trail leading to an old cottage. Upon entering the house, Merida came across an elderly woman and swiftly realized that she was a witch. In her desperate attempt to alter her fate, Merida implored the witch to conjure a spell that would change her mother's mind, assuming that her mother would understand her perspective. Despite Merida's request for help, the witch declined and instead used her magical powers to intimidate her into leaving. Undeterred, Merida offered the witch a necklace that her mother had given her as a gift. The offer proved to be too tempting for the witch to resist, and she finally agreed to help Merida. She concocted a mixture that eventually resulted in a small pie and instructed Merida to give it to her mother, as it may alter her fate. As Merida was leaving the cottage, the witch suddenly remembered something important about the spell and called out to Merida. However, when Merida turned around, the witch in her cottage had disappeared without a trace. Merida rides back to Dunbroch where she finds Fergus and the lords enjoying themselves. She heads straight to the kitchen to prepare the spell pie. Inside the kitchen, Eleanor finds Merida and expresses her concern. However, Merida gives the pie to Eleanor, explaining that she made it as an excuse for her earlier behavior. Eleanor takes a bite of the pie, leaves it on the table, and they proceed upstairs to meet the lords. However, Eleanor starts to feel unwell soon after, and Merida helps her mother to the stairs to rest. She guides her to her bed and helps her lie down. Suddenly, Eleanor's health deteriorates, causing her to fall off the bed and transform into a large, frightening bear. Merida is frightened by the sight of the beast, and Eleanor herself becomes overwhelmed with terror when she sees herself transform into a bear. Upon closer inspection, Merida realizes that her mother has been transformed into a bear. Frightened and confused, Merida explains to her bear mother what has happened. Upon hearing this, her mother becomes angry and roars. Fergus, who is downstairs in the hall, notices an unusual scent and orders the lords to follow him up the stairs. Merida tells her mother that they must go to the witch who put the spell on her. Together, they attempt to leave the castle unnoticed, with Merida trying to avoid her father catching them as they make their way out. Unexpectedly, they encounter her 3 brothers. Merida explains the situation to them, and with the assistance of her 3 little brothers, manages to lead the guards astray on the castle roof while she and her mother make their escape into the forest. However, while following their assistance, the boys stumbled upon the pie created by the witch. Merida took her mother into the forest and back to the witch's cottage. However, upon arrival, they discovered that the house was empty. Merida then found a message left by the witch, explaining that she would not be back until spring and apologizing for forgetting to inform her about the spell. The witch warned that Merida must mend the bond torn by pride before the second sunrise, or else the spell would become permanent. Upon hearing this, Merida became concerned. In the morning, Merida took Eleanor to a river to find fish for their breakfast and teach her mother how to catch fish. The two bonded and had fun, ultimately strengthening their relationship. Suddenly, Eleanor snapped out of her reverie and wandered into the forest. Concerned, Merida asked Eleanor to wait for her and followed her. However, Eleanor's behavior abruptly changed, and she began exhibiting bear-like tendencies. As Eleanor prepared to attack Merida, she suddenly returned to her normal self. Both bewildered by the sudden turn of events, they noticed wisps appearing in front of them. As they followed the trail of wisps, it eventually led them to an ancient, destroyed city. While exploring the area, they came across a castle. It was during this exploration that Merida accidentally fell into a pit, which brought her into an old throne room. As she explored the room, she realized that it was the palace of the 4 brothers, which her mother had often mentioned in her stories. Continuing her exploration, she stumbled upon an ancient stone tablet engraved with images of the 4 brothers, but she noticed that one of them was chipped off, much like the way she had cut the tapestry of her own family earlier. Pondering the significance of the tablet, she began to comprehend that the curse had occurred before, when the eldest brother had thirsted for power and had been transformed into a terrifying beast known as Mordu by the same witch. Suddenly, she came face to face with Mordu, who launched an attack on Merida, causing her to run away. With her mother's help, she managed to escape from him, and together they fled from the city. Eventually, they arrived back at the Statue of Stones. Merida realized that in order to save her mother from being permanently transformed into a bear like Mordu, she must break the spell before sunrise by repairing the cut tapestry. They cautiously made their way back to the castle. Upon arrival, their aim was to get the tapestry to the upper floor without being seen. However, as they approached, they discovered a commotion. King Fergus and the lords were in the midst of fighting and breaking alliances due to Merida's refusal to marry. The only way for them to reach her bedroom was by passing through the conflict. Merida stepped forward and entered the room, taking action by distracting the lords, which allowed Eleanor to slip away upstairs. Merida then delivered a rousing speech to the clans, persuading them to come to an agreement and end the conflict. Afterwards, she announced that there would be a celebration in the king's cellar. Once they had left, they made their way to the torn tapestry and began searching for thread and nails to fix it. However, Eleanor suddenly transformed back into a regular bear and started searching for food. Then Merida heard her father, Fergus, approaching Eleanor's room. However, upon entering their bedroom, he was taken aback by the disarray. The bed was broken and Eleanor's dress torn. Overwhelmed by shock, he rushed to Merida's room and encountered a bear. Without hesitation, he unsheathed his sword and engaged in battle. Merida attempted to stop him, but Eleanor scratched her arm with her bare paw and ultimately overpowered Fergus. After Eleanor had regained her composure and realized her actions, she hastily left the area. While on her way out, she encountered the lords who began pursuing her as she fled from the castle. Meanwhile, Merida tried to convince her father that she was Eleanor, but he didn't believe her. To ensure Merida's safety, he locked her in a room and entrusted the key to a servant. Afterward, he and the clans gathered together and pursued Eleanor. Merida attempted to escape by breaking the door, but her efforts were in vain. At this moment, she observed her brothers approaching her, having transformed into bear cubs. She instructed them to retrieve the key from the servant, which they successfully accomplished, and gave it to her. Merida tore down the tapestry and, together with her brothers, embarked on a mission to rescue Eleanor. Along the way, Merida mended the torn tapestry. In the interim, King Fergus and his clans pursued Eleanor unrelentingly until they eventually caught up with her at the Satchway of Stones. They managed to capture and restrain her. Fergus was on the verge of executing her, but just in the nick of time, Merida arrived and prevented the execution. She engaged in a fierce fight with her father, ultimately overpowering him and brought him down. Out of nowhere, Mor'du appeared and caused an interruption. King Fergus and his soldiers initiated an attack. However, Mor'du succeeded in defeating every single one of them, and proceeded to pursue Merida. Just as he was about to kill her, Eleanor miraculously escaped from the ropes and managed to save her daughter. Afterward, a fierce battle erupted between Eleanor and Mor'du. Despite the struggle, Eleanor persevered and was able to strike Mor'du against a nearby statue and then against the stone until it shattered. This caused the statue to fall onto Mor'du, resulting in his immediate death. With his spirit liberated from the curse, Mor'du nodded in gratitude before disappearing into the ether. As the sunrise approached, Merida hurriedly retrieved the repaired tapestry and draped it over her mother. However, to her dismay, when the sun rose, Eleanor did not revert back to human form but instead remained a bear. Overcome with guilt and sorrow, Merida burst into tears, apologizing for what she had done, and embraced her mother while the others watched with heavy hearts. Suddenly, as the first rays of sunlight touched the tapestry, Eleanor reverted to her human form and warmly embraced her daughter, overjoyed to be reunited with her. Finally, the curse was lifted and Merida's brothers turned back into humans. The family shared a group hug, and the clans were elated as they settled their arguments and returned to their kingdom. Meanwhile, Merida and Eleanor grew closer and strengthened their mother-daughter bond, finding happiness in each other's company.